So what difference will this carbon farming initiative make? And here I'm not talking about difference to you guys, I'm talking about difference to the country's emissions in terms of when Australia rocks up to a United Nations conference and said, we've got these policies and we've done this much, we've reduced our emissions, we're on track to our target. The dark bits are the lower estimate and the light bits are the upper estimate. So they reckon at most, this is the government, they reckon at most about 15 million tonnes or megatonnes of carbon dioxide will be reduced from Australia's total emissions in 2020. So in 2020 will be 15 megatonnes less. That's about 3% of our emissions, which isn't a lot. But it's about 10 or 11% of agriculture's emissions, which is nothing to sneeze at. And what that represents to me, if that is right, is that farmers and pastoralists and other landholders, Indigenous communities and others are taking control of their emissions, innovating, changing their practices, doing it because, remember it's voluntary, but doing it because there is something in it for them. They've decided there's something in it for them. And it may not be just the money, it may be biodiversity benefits that they get from it, Indigenous employment, local community benefits, whatever it is. They've decided to take part in that market and they are innovating and reducing their emissions and they're bringing investment from the big end of town into the bush to do that. So while it doesn't look huge in terms of reducing Australia's carbon footprint on the world, I think it's really important because it does all those other things. And you can see it, they reckon a lot of it's going to come from avoided deforestation. That's perhaps in the north for the most part, where it's still legal to clear in some parts. Reforestation, so those are the obvious ones. Landfill's a special case. Landfill operators are actually in the weird position of being emitters, many of them. They cross that 25,000 tonne threshold and they actually become liable for the carbon price or the carbon tax. But they can offset, they can actually produce offsets or carbon credits to sell, so they can do both. And they're big sources of methane in particular. And then things like savanna burning down here. And then they reckon a little bit from fertilisers, manure management and livestock. But over time, this is likely to grow as the technologies and the practices are perfected and people find ways of reducing emissions from livestock without reducing production, because of course that would be silly. But let's expect it to help producers bring their emissions down without undermining their production. Let's expect it to give some people an extra income stream. Let's expect it to help some people get the biodiversity or the employment benefits that they want whilst tapping into this market or through tapping into this market. Let's expect it to catalyse new practices, new technologies, new ways of thinking and doing things, new business models. And fresh investment. Let's expect it to raise that level of carbon literacy, the capacity of landholders to read and understand and trade on the carbon market with confidence, so that by 2020 it's not fools like me up here, it's you guys, and you guys are the best carbon farmers in the world. You know how it's done. And you're helping a hungry world develop these new technologies and practices. Because worldwide we need to feed more people, and those people are demanding more meat and other high-end products, and we need to find a way of doing that without putting so much pressure on the climate. And really the way of doing that is to give farmers a stake in the carbon market, pardon the pun, is to give them a role in the carbon market so that they can decide for themselves whether there's something in it for them and they can deliver all these other co-benefits. So just the final word. The first thing I would say, coming back to the beginning, is this issue of carbon ain't going away. It may be being treated like a political football now, but it just simply isn't going away. In other countries, both sides of politics try to outdo each other on doing more with to reduce carbon. In Europe, you have companies like Coca-Cola and Fuji Xerox and Unilever lobbying the European Parliament to increase its carbon reduction target. You have more and more governments coming aboard. Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, India has a modest carbon tax already. China, as I said, is developing it. It's just not going away. But importantly, our carbon price will be linked to the international market and the international price, so it'll go up, it'll go down. many covered firms or many firms that are already liable for their emissions are already looking for offset providers. But I said before that I don't think the land sector, in the first few years at least, will be able to satisfy that demand. But it does put you in an interesting position, and Ben will go into more detail about what he reckons the market expects, and that's going to be very important. The CFI has bipartisan support. It is a separate piece of legislation to the Clean Energy Futures package, so the carbon tax is quite separate. And I think in any case, calls to scrap, and blood oaths notwithstanding, I think it is going to be really tough to repeal that. I don't know how many taxes that have been introduced in this country that have actually ever been repealed, but it's going to be tricky because people will then have a stake in that market and they will have invested a lot of money. And I mean, it could happen, but I doubt it.